welcome to Your Family Dog, a podcast dedicated to helping families love living with dogs.
Hi, and welcome back to Your Family Dog. I'm Julie Fudge Smith, and I'm here, of course, with Tina Spring. And we, as we always say every time we have a guest, but this is exceptionally true, we are so excited to have Zazie Todd back with us. As frequent listeners will know, we've had Zazie on twice before to talk about her previous two books, Wag and Purr. And we talk about Zazie all the time. We have referenced her. I went back and pulled up Your Family Dog podcast and put a search bar in for Zazie Todd, and it was loaded. I mean, not just the two we talked to you about, but how many times we referenced your books in use. So you are a favorite. You're a friend of Your Family Dog. A little bit about Zazie, if you haven't listened to our previous episodes. She is the acclaimed author of Wag and Purr. She is a creator of the Companion Animal Psychology, which is truly a in-depth, award-winning blog that shares the latest in science about our animal companions and uses evidence-based ways to care for them. She has a PhD in psychology, is an honors graduate of the Academy for Dog Trainers, and an affiliate member of the American Veterinary Society of Animal Behavior. You live in British Columbia with your husband and a dog and a cat. So welcome back, Zazie. We're just absolutely thrilled to be here and to be talking about your brand new book called Bark, The Science of Helping Your Anxious, Fearful, or Reactive Dog. So building so much on all the other things that you have talked about in your other two books, we're delighted to have you back to talk to us about our fearful companions. So with that, Tina, you get the first question.
So Zazie, I'm so excited you're here. Welcome back. You are definitely one of the family. And Julie and I were talking about, we could invite you back once a quarter and easily find things this is a podcast that basically records itself because you're awesome. So before I even ask a question, I'd like you to talk about if you had your heart's desire for anything to be said about this book, what would it be?
Oh, what a lovely question. And thank you so much for that lovely introduction and for welcoming me back on the show. I'm delighted to chat with you both again because your podcasts are always so much fun. And I guess what I would like people to know about this book is that it's very practical, but it is completely science-based. It is there to help you if your dog is fearful, anxious, or reactive in any way. And it explains the science generally to begin with and what you need to do. And there are some technical things. I've explained them really clearly so that you can make sure that you get those things right, because so often people struggle with a fearful dog or an anxious dog. And I've really tried to make it easy for people to understand what they need to do. And there are separate chapters. Once you've read the beginning, there are separate chapters on things like being afraid of unknown people, being a resource guarder, having separation-related issues and things like that. So there's a ton of useful information in there. And I think it's my best book yet. I mean, I like to think I've learned from writing about Wag and Purr. So I've really tried hard with this one, and I'm pleased with the reaction that it's getting as well.
Yes, I would agree that this is really terrific in the way that it's organized. So it makes it very approachable. I think one of the questions that Tina and I have is, why are dogs afraid? What is it that causes them to be afraid? How do we recognize fear versus perhaps anxiety, or is anxiety a form of fear? And maybe you can talk a little bit about, has this fear in dogs, has it been exacerbated by the pandemic? Have you noticed a change in dogs because of that or not?
Those are some great questions. I was actually really shocked by one of the statistics that I came across when I was working on this book, which is that according to one very large study, almost 3/4 of dogs have some kind of fear or anxiety, which is a huge number. And so we can, huge. And that's quite shocking, really. And the most common will be loud noises, being afraid of loud noises like fireworks, for example. A very large number of dogs are afraid of loud bangs, basically. And there are lots of other common fears too. And what goes into causing a fear is quite complex. So I always like to tell people that it's not their fault, because even if you've done absolutely everything right with your dog, it's still possible for you to end up with a fearful or reactive dog. And I think that's important because a lot of people blame themselves, but there are lots of different things that go into creating a dog who is fearful or anxious. And that includes genetics. And that's one reason why it's so important, if you're getting a puppy, to make sure that you meet the mum, if at all possible. Ideally, you would also meet the dad too and check that they're both really nice, lovely, friendly, confident dogs, happy, confident dogs. Because if they are anxious or they're too afraid to meet you, that would set off a few red flags, because we know that genetics is one part of it, but that's only one part of it. And we also know that experiences, like if the mom is stressed while the puppy is in the womb, that can make a difference. And the theory behind that is that circulating hormones are kind of helping to prepare the puppy for the life that they're going to be born into. And if actually they're going to have a very stressful life, then that might be evolutionary advantage, but they're going to come and live with you in a life that's not stressful. They do not need to be on alert all of the time, and actually that would be quite detrimental to them. Obviously, early life experiences while they're still in the nest. Socialization is a big one. So the need to socialize puppies between 3 and about 12 to 14 weeks in a way that is very positive and supportive and encouraging of the puppy, not forcing the puppy to be exposed to anything, always giving them a choice. That's really important. And a lot of fears are simply because the dog wasn't exposed during that time. And then, of course, just like us, if they have a bad experience, that can cause fear and anxiety. So they just happen to walk out the door and suddenly there's a really loud bang and they're terrified. That can set them up to be afraid of loud bangs in future. And then another thing that we know now is that as well, there may be pain or medical issues contributing too. And that might especially be the case in an older dog. For example, if you have a dog who's never been afraid of fireworks and now they're 6 or 7 years old and all of a sudden they are, that would be a sign that perhaps you should see a vet, because there might be something medical going on there too. So there are all these different factors that contribute. And then we can also draw a distinction between fear and anxiety if we want to, which is that fear is a response to something that happens. And it's a really important response, actually, from an evolutionary perspective. It helps to keep us safe. Something terrifying happens, it tells us to run away or to fight or whatever. And that's an important response. So we have to remember that fear isn't necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes it makes sense. Whereas anxiety can be a longer lasting thing. It can be a longer lasting sense of being worried about things. And there's not necessarily actually anything in the environment that is there that is a threat. That can be a bit hard for us to judge because we don't know what's going on inside the dog's head. But if we can see that they're frightened in lots and lots of different situations, maybe that's more of an anxiety. We don't need to know. We just need to know that it's fear or anxiety. That's enough for us to know that we need to do something. The veterinarians might want to think a bit more about what it is, because they'll have to think about what kind of drugs they might or might not want to prescribe. And that, I'm not a vet, so that's not a question for me, but it's something that I think is important for people to be aware of.
Yeah, when you were talking about a situation that can happen, suddenly I was thinking about when I was working at All About Dogs in Virginia, and it was we had a client with a beautiful golden retriever, about 18 months old, maybe. Just a great dog, really rock solid. But as he was driving literally to class, a bolt of lightning and thunder crashed right in front of him, scared the bejeebers out of both him and the dog, changed the dog forever. From that point on, the dog was terrified of the car, was terrified of rain, was terrified of flashing lights, was terrified of loud noises. So it can be that it just can be at a particular time and be of such significance. I mean, when I know that, I'd jump out of my skin. When we were living in Virginia again, a lightning struck a tree in our yard, and I sat straight up in bed. Both dogs leaped into bed with us. And it's really scary when that goes off right by you. So I can't blame the dog any. But I think you're right that people tend to think it's something that I did when there's generally an awful lot of factors going on. That's not to say that what you did may not have made it a little worse or exacerbated it, but probably didn't cause it. So anyway, sorry, Tina, I jumped in on you.
That's okay. We're all friends here. Okay. So, Zazie, you have part of a chapter talking about how to be a safe person for your dog. And I actually had an experience with a very well-meaning owner today with a very high, or this week, with a very high-strung dog who her attempts to, quote, socialize have actually sensitized the dog. And she accidentally was punishing the fear. Now, I don't want to, she wasn't using some big heavy aversive. This is just a really fearful dog. So he's sensitive. So just telling him no and scolding him was enough that we've eliminated the warnings. And so that's gotten really dangerous for him and for anyone around him. So I'd like you to really talk more about how to be a safe person for your dog.
Yeah, because the most important thing for a fearful dog is to keep them feeling safe. And that emphasis has to be on feeling safe, not just being safe. Of course, they have to actually be safe as well, but you want them to feel safe. And one of those things is to make sure that you're paying really close attention to them and to really get good at reading their body language, because then you can tell if they're not feeling safe and you can step in and you can do something about it to help them to feel better. And again, the emphasis is on their feelings. So unfortunately, a lot of people do punish their dog for growling because they think a dog shouldn't growl. And that's really worrying when people do that, and very troublesome, because that growl is a really useful warning sign and it tells you that the dog is feeling uncomfortable. You should be really grateful that your dog is growling in those circumstances, because that means you can say, okay, what's going on? What can I do? And you can stop what you're doing, whatever it is, and you can help to make the dog feel safer. And unfortunately, if you don't, and there are some stories of this in the book as well, what can happen is that the dog stops growling, but they're still feeling very fearful or afraid. And then they have to move to some other level to stop you, to stop. Like, suppose you're going in to pet them and they really don't want to be petted. If they growl, you can say, okay, I'll stop petting you, and take a step back, or just stand absolutely still and leave them alone and not look at them. And that can help. If you've punished them for growling, then they don't have that way of telling you that they're uncomfortable. And maybe you're petting them and they're uncomfortable and they're just going to go to bite you or to nip at you. And that's really unfortunate. It's unfortunate for the dog, because sometimes dogs who bite people get euthanized or they get rehomed. And it's unfortunate for you, because now you have a bite that you have to deal with and you potentially have to go to hospital if it's a stranger who's been bitten. Maybe they even have to have rabies jabs or something like that. It's just a really horrid situation. So it's really important to pay close attention to your dog's body language and never ever punish them for growling. Be grateful that they growl, but also learn to recognize the body language signs that occur before that, which could be as simple as licking the lips, the tail being tucked, the posture being low, them looking away from you, them trying to move away from you. Always make sure they have the opportunity to move away from you if they want to. All of those things are really important, because then you can do something about it. You can say, how can I reduce this dog's stress level? And you can say to the person who's marching to your dog, please don't approach, my dog won't be happy about it. Or don't pet my dog today, they don't feel like it. Or you can pretend that your dog is sick if that's an easier way for you to explain it to someone else. But you have to be your dog's advocate in those situations. And you can only do that if you notice when they're stressed. And one of the other really important things that you can do is make sure that your dog has a safe space in the home, and that is a space that is theirs, that they can go to whenever they want to, where you will never get them out of it. You might call them away, but you will never approach there and force them out of it. It's just theirs to go to. And it could be a dog bed with like an invisible boundary 2 feet around it or something, so that no one will go right up to it. Or it could be a crate. If it's a crate, it can't be a crate that you will ever send them to. So if you send your dog to a crate, sometimes you have to have a different crate to be their safe space, because they always have to have the choice to go there. And you need to make sure that everyone in the household will recognize this safe space and let them go. And that gives them some freedom. It gives them some control over their environment. It gives them some choice. If they don't want to interact with people, they've got somewhere that they can go. It's a really important thing to do, and it really helps them to feel safe.
I really like the fact that you talked about the 2 different crates, the one that you send them to and the one that's their home. That's not something I had thought about. I think I kind of did that intuitively, had a space where you go to, I rope you off or whatever. So I think that was a really interesting point. I'm so glad you brought that up. When my daughter and her husband and I think they have four. I think they had 4 kids at the time. Anyway, we're living with us. Zuzu, my flat coat, sometimes just couldn't take 4 kids. It was just like way too much stuff. So I had a gate across my office with a little sign on it that said Zuzu's alone zone. So that if Zuzu was in my office and the gate was closed, or even if the gate wasn't closed, the sign was up that if Zuzu was in there, that's her alone zone and you leave her alone. So I think you can make it sort of user friendly for everybody. It doesn't have to be, this is the hands-off zone. You can use a clever way in which it makes it a little bit easier for everyone to accept what you're talking about. Because I think everybody has the idea that, having a bit of time alone is probably a good thing. So it was a good thing for your dog as well. I guess one of the things you kind of talked about it a little bit, but maybe you could expound on is some of the common mistakes that people make with a fearful dog, other than, punishing the growling, which I wish people could see that Tina and I are just we're like bobblehead dolls here, just nodding away. Because these are things that we have said to our clients, things that we have said on the podcast. So it's so wonderful for us to have an expert say the same things that we have been trying to repeat for all these years.
And to be fair, it's a natural response.
Yes.
I have to fight back the urge to go, stop that, right? I don't want anyone to think that just because we're saying don't do it, that's easy. I fully recognize that our natural response is be nice. What's this about? Especially if the dog is not fearful with the handler doing things with the dog and it's directed at strangers or other dogs, but the dog is great with other dogs, maybe in the household. I think our natural response is to try to silence the barking dog or silence the growling dog. And it's a natural response. I don't think that I think that was the hardest. So I had the client earlier this week broke my 8-year run of not getting bitten by a dog. And it wasn't a bad bite. He's a sweet dog. I'm not mad at him. We're still going to help him. But there was a larger discussion of just being disappointed in him because he's growling. Well, he's growling because he's telling you he's not ready, right? That's all he can do. He can't hire an attorney, right? So if to be clear, if I'm going to be disappointed at all, I was disappointed in me that I deferred to the owner who knows this dog better than I do. It was our first consult. Instead of what I know, which is all of the body language was this dog wasn't comfortable. But when the owner said, oh yeah, he just does this and he does it when I come home too. We misread it sometimes. And I want to have a lot of grace for that because this isn't easy stuff.
No, but you're absolutely right. And I'm sorry that happened to you. And it's not easy stuff. And even for professionals, there are times when we make mistakes. And especially, I think if it's your own dog, we perhaps are a bit less tolerant because we expect the dog to be more tolerant than we would for a stranger's dog. And so it can be so easy to miss some of those signs or just not be paying enough attention in the moment. And it is hard. We also have a history of people telling us that we should tell dogs off. There is this long history of people being told that they should do that. So we have to counter all of these things that people have been mistakenly told for a long time too. And so it can even be a habit, and habits can be very hard to break and to change. But yeah, so don't punish your dog for growling. That's one of the important things to know. So another thing is about helping your dog to feel safe. That means not putting your dog in a situation where they don't feel safe. And that's a common mistake that people make, again, because they kind of hope that the dog will just get used to the situation. And so they keep on putting them into circumstances where they know the dog is not entirely happy, but they hope it will work out and they hope the dog will get used to it. So that's a very common mistake. But you have to remember, your priority is to help the dog feel safe, that means you don't put them in those situations. You do your very best to avoid those situations, even if sometimes that's a bit socially awkward or a bit uncomfortable, or it means you can't take your dog places where you would like to take them and they have to stay home. So that's another common mistake. There are lots of mistakes people make when it comes to the actual training as well. So the main way that we train a dog who is fearful is with counter conditioning, and it is a bit technical, but the essential thing is that when something happens that the dog considers scary, ideally it's a level where they still feel safe, because we've got to keep them feeling safe. That's the most important thing. But when that thing is there, we give them a wonderful treat. And a lot of people are kind of reluctant to give those wonderful treats, or they just want to use kibble or something like that. And it really does need to be a wonderful treat, because you want to be causing new learning for the dog. You want to be teaching the dog that this thing that they consider scary actually is really wonderful, because it predicts wonderful, yummy snacks. So they really do have to be yummy snacks. And the way I've been writing about it in the book is that when the thing that's considered scary happens, you give them the ultimate snack. Like, it has to be an amazing snack, like chicken, cheese, roast beef, something they absolutely will love. There's no point in being stingy, because then it won't work. And the other way I like to talk about it in the book is that this should be a wonderful surprise. You're really trying to create a wonderful surprise so that the dog is learning, yay, this is wonderful, this is so lovely, instead of being afraid of it. So you really need that big element of surprise there in order actually for the training to work.
So I have people practice with benign stimuli. So a lot of times if we have a dog that, because it is a technical skill that the handler is typically having to learn, if they've never had a dog that was fearful or reactive or whatever, they're learning a whole bunch of new skills and they're worried about their dog. So we know that whether it's people or animals, under stress, behavior breaks down. And so I might say to someone whose dog is afraid of thunder, every time you're like, we're going to sit down outside with, roast beef cut up into itty bitty pieces. And every time a red car goes by, we're going to pay that the dog's not afraid of cars. We're going to pay the dog with roast beef every time there's a red car, right? Or every time we see a cardinal, or every time we get to an odd numbered mailbox address, right? So that it's something where the human is practicing the skill and their timing and their mechanical skill, as well as their emotional skill. Because I can tell you, if a dog is afraid of other dogs and barks at them, the person very quickly is picking up, they are classically conditioned to a negative degree, where they now are like on the lookout for dogs because here comes the explosion from my dog. So what are some other things people can do to really, one, make sure they're avoiding a mistake, and to practice this skill that's new for them too?
I love that way of practicing the skill. And you're so right. It is actually quite a difficult skill. And it's so important to practice it in a situation where it's easy for the dog and it's easy for the person. And one of the things that the person has to get right is to make sure that the dog has seen the thing that they consider scary before you even reach for those wonderful treats. So you have to prepare those amazing treats in advance. So you've got the roast beef or whatever, cheese in your bait bag or in your pocket, and you've got it, but you're not going to actually reach for it until, the dog has spotted whatever it is that's considered scary. So that's one of the things that's important, because then we're making sure that the thing that the dog considers scary, again, at a low level where they still feel safe, predicts the treats. So the scary thing predicts the treats. Because what can happen, and it's such a common mistake, again, is that people get it the wrong way around. So if the dog is afraid of other dogs, they're scanning for dogs. They're looking out for dogs everywhere. They see a dog in the distance and they reach for the piece of roast beef or cheese or whatever it is, before the dog has actually noticed that the other dog is there. And what happens then sometimes is that you have a dog who sees you reach for the treat and they're like, what's going on? Where's the scary thing? Where is it? Because they've learned instead that the piece of chicken will predict that there's a dog somewhere else. So that's another issue. That's another technical thing that it's important for people to practice. And again, it involves paying really close attention to your dog. So I love the way that you practice this with people, Tina. I think that's fantastic. And it's so important for people to get this practice in beforehand, because we all get stuck in those moments where something has happened. It's much bigger or worse than we anticipated. And the dog is going off and barking and lunging, and it feels awful. And it's really hard for the dog because the dog is struggling, but it's also really hard for the person. The person is struggling in those circumstances. And we know that people feel embarrassed or angry or like they've let their dog down, or a whole host of negative emotions in those circumstances. And also, sometimes people feel like the training isn't working, and we need to make sure that they get it right so that it does work, because it does work. It's an incredibly effective technique, but it is a bit technical. And I put loads of tips in the book to help people. Like if it's not working, there's lots of tips in there for you to try and do and practice. So yeah, I think it's so important to actually think of this as a skill that the person has to learn. And so many people think it should just happen quickly and easily, and unfortunately it doesn't.
One of the things I love what Tina said about, associating, learning to practice it by recognizing a particular thing that's red or blue or green or whatever. But I think the step that I would take with people is to make sure they understand what a threshold is, and that you are always working below your dog's reaction level. So that the first time we try to do this, where the actual scary stimuli, where the fire-breathing dragon is going to appear, we're working at a distance where if we see this fire-breathing dragon, we may notice it, but we're not going to go over the top. And then, so we notice the fire-breathing dragon, we get a piece of chicken. But it's at a point where I'm noticing it, but I'm not reacting. So I think that's sort of the next step, is so that you learn to recognize that your dog has seen it, then I get a treat. And that I would rather you work at a distance where the dog is completely unreactive and just noticing, than to push that distance shorter and shorter and shorter until suddenly you're falling over threshold and all the good work you've done is sort of falling apart. The other thing I was going to say in conjunction to this, when I was working with Gary people, one of the things that we always talked about was my rule of two escape routes at all times. So that when we're walking, you are scanning. And this is why it's like, I'm like, put your phone in your purse or in your pocket or in your, this is not that you cannot have your phone at this time, because not only are you going to be on the lookout for whatever the fire-breathing dragon is that scares your dog, but you also have to pay attention to, I'm coming up to an intersection, I can't see around that corner. If a dog should come, where are the two escape routes that I have? Which way can I turn? Can I back up? Can I turn? So we would practice turning around. We had different ways of turning around, whether we turn and turn the dog towards us and then turn. So I practiced turning around. We practiced scanning for escape routes. And the other escape route, I said, you're talking mental and physical. So not only are we looking for places where we can add physical distance, but mental distance. So that if we're suddenly set upon by this fire-breathing dragon, my hand has a fistful of roast beef and it's right in your nose. And suddenly, there is, as I called it to one person, a virtual hailstorm of deliciousness. You've got this hailstorm just coming down. So the dog is paying close attention to you, to the food. The other dog moves along. So I think there's lots of things, lots of different skills that you can put together, that as you practice each one of those skills, it becomes easier and easier to manage your dog and to keep him safe in whatever situation, to the best of your ability anyway, in any situation that you come across.
Absolutely. I love that. I've been sitting here nodding and nodding, just like I was when Tina was speaking a minute ago. Yes. All of these skills.
That's all it is. We're just nodding at one another. Yes, yes, yes.
Yes. But all of these skills are so important to learn. And actually, because once you've learned all of these skills, you've learned a lot. That's why I even included a section in Bark on how to become a dog trainer or work with dogs, because there are these people who get a fearful dog and they learn such a lot to help their dog. And in the end, they think, well, actually, I can put this to good use helping other dogs. And so I put that in there to encourage people, because for a lot of dog trainers, that is their route into dog training, actually, is having a fearful dog and really struggling and getting through it and learning these things. And I think it's helpful for people to know that it is a skill, that you do have to learn it, that it's not just easy, that it's also not just something the dog has to learn, it's something you have to learn as well. I think that's really helpful. And the other thing is that I've got a quote from veterinary behaviorist Dr. Claudia Richter at the start of the book, where she says that if you are a dog professional and you have a fearful or anxious dog, you should seek out help, because when it's your own dog, it's different. And again, I think that's something that is really helpful for ordinary dog guardians to know, is that this just is a difficult situation and there is a lot to learn, and having fresh eyes on it is really helpful. And hopefully that will encourage dog guardians to realize that it's okay to reach out for help, and it's a good idea to reach out for help so long as you go to the right place. And that's obviously another thing that's really important. But find someone who will use kind, humane methods to help you with your dog, and they will help to teach you all of these skills that you need to know.
So how would someone assess, I have a different question, but how would someone assess the right person to help?
Yeah, so the most important thing is that it has to be someone who is only going to use what we call reward-based methods. And the reason for that is that if we use aversive methods, by which I mean things like shock collars, prong collars, telling the dog off, hitting the dog, helicoptering the dog, pushing them on their side, all of those kinds of things, they rely on fear and pain. And there is now a huge ton of research that suggests that they may cause fear, anxiety, stress, aggression, a worse relationship with you, and so on and so on and so on. So with a fearful dog, your priority is to help them feel safe. That means you need to find a trainer who is going to help them to feel safe too. So unfortunately, a lot of dog trainers' websites are not very clearly written. So you have to look very, very carefully at what they say. Even if they say they use positive reinforcement, it doesn't guarantee that they do, unfortunately. So you have to make sure that they really do. If you end up accidentally hiring someone and they're recommending anything that involves fear, anxiety, or pain, walk away and find another dog trainer instead. So ask around people in your neighborhood. Ask your vet. You can look on directories of organizations like the Pet Professional Guild, like Fear Free, like organizations or educational organizations as well, like the Academy for Dog Trainers or Karen Pryor Academy, Victoria Stilwell Academy, other places like that. There's a list in the book of all the different kind of alphabet soup letters that can go at the end of someone's name to help people understand what they mean. But if you're not sure, ask. If you don't feel comfortable with the trainer, don't hire them. If they're recommending anything which is not prioritizing your dog feeling safe, walk away.
And also being kind to you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
So if you're talking to any trainer who's being ugly to you, you need to walk away, right? Because this is the kind of work where you as the handler also need to have grace extended to you. There's going to be a certain amount of, in my experience, grief associated with working through this because we've all made errors. And that the trainer has to be a soft place to land where you can call at any time or text at any time, and the person is going to meet you where you are the same way that they should be advocating for meeting the dog where the dog is. I think there are a lot of really beautifully gifted dog trainers out there and behavior professionals who aren't necessarily great at the people part. And that can really, really set you back. So I'm gonna throw that in there to advocate for the person too, because nobody wants a dog who's terrified of stuff or is acting out or is barking at everybody or makes life difficult. This is a really difficult set of circumstances sometimes to live with. It's quite stressful. So can you talk to some of the ways that handlers are stressed or family members are stressed by having a dog that has a lot of fear or anxiety?
Yeah, basically, it can be really, really stressful because, especially until you know that you need to keep your dog feeling safe, your dog might go off in various situations where it's just really hard to handle. Like, it even can be hard just to keep a hold of the leash while your dog is going off sometimes. And it is embarrassing and it does feel really difficult. And then people have to sometimes grieve for the life that they thought they were going to have with the dog, but that they can't have anymore because maybe they got the dog wanting to walk on busy forest trails and go to sit on restaurant patios and things like that. But the dog is afraid of people they don't know. So actually that's not possible because the dog doesn't feel safe in those circumstances. And at least while you're working on it, you have to leave the dog at home. You can't take them to the restaurant patio because there'll be too many people around and they'll be growling or they'll be cowering under the table or something like that. So that wouldn't help them feel safe. So you can't do that. And that is something that I find people do have to grieve. And then you don't actually know in the long run until you've done some training or been working with a good dog trainer for a while. They'll be able to give you an idea. Maybe this is something that you'll be able to work towards in the future. And maybe it's not. Maybe that's never going to be suitable for your dog, depending on their background, how the fear came about, how long this issue has been going on for, and how fearful they are. And then you have to find other things to do with your dog instead. And I think because as a society, we have all these perceptions that a dog is always good for us, that a dog is always a wonderful thing to have in your family, and that, you know, that they're going to help to improve your physical and your mental health. Then when you get a dog and there are issues and actually it's really hard, there's this big disconnect. And I think it helps people to understand that they don't actually necessarily improve our physical and mental health. Actually, the research on that is very mixed. There are circumstances in which they do and circumstances in which they don't. And maybe until you get the hang of living with a fearful dog, this might actually be a circumstance in which it just is very hard. And the more that you can learn to help your dog, it's also going to help you and find ways to manage the situation and make it easier for everybody, really. And it's especially important that everybody in the household is on the same page, because you all need to work together to help the dog. So you all have to prioritize helping the dog to feel safe. And I think sometimes when there's conflict within the family, that can make it really hard too. That can make it much more difficult for people.
So I'm seeing it. I'm seeing a trend here locally where families are moving older family members in to caretake for them. Often Alzheimer's and dementia patients who, some of that, so dogs who have never been sensitive suddenly are becoming sensitive as a response to other environmental factors in the home. So things like someone with Alzheimer's or dementia, or another significant mental health crisis, someone who maybe is sick in some other way, that there are caregivers in and out, or that there's conflict, that even though everyone's well-meaning, like there's going to be a certain amount of conflict. And suddenly the dog goes from a household where that wasn't the case to a household where conflict is happening more often. In those kinds of situations, if I have someone with a significant set of circumstances that are on their own plate, you're not going to get compliance from everyone. So when those are the cases, what would you recommend?
Yeah, I think that can be really difficult. And also there was some research a while back from veterinary behaviorists that found that one of the other circumstances in which it's quite difficult sometimes to have a good resolution is when there's an adolescent, a teenager in the home. And they thought that's because there can be a lot of conflict sometimes when there's a teenager in the home. So it can be really difficult to get everybody on the same page, but it's essential in order to resolve the issues with the dog. And there are circumstances when actually the best solution is to find another home for the dog. That can sometimes be the best outcome. And also there can be outcomes which I think are very sad, but where actually euthanasia ends up being the best outcome. And people don't like to talk about that very much for obvious reasons. It's a very sad situation, but there are times when it seems like for the dog's welfare and the family's welfare, that might be the best thing to do. And that's not a decision to take lightly or to rush into. Of course, when you're thinking of rehoming a dog, you have to bear in mind that there likely isn't a perfect home out there. So it's much better if you yourself can find a way to work around this situation to get everybody on board. Because, sometimes there is. And so there are rescues and shelters that do a wonderful job of rehoming dogs and that offer good quality behavior advice to the home that the dog is going to, and that will take the dog back if things don't work out. So It can be an excellent option, but I think often people think there must be this magical home out there that will be just perfect. And that's often not the case. It can take quite a while to rehome a dog, especially at the moment when I think there are more dogs looking for homes than there have been previously. Or, for example, during the pandemic when everybody was rushing out to get a dog. And actually, that's a question you asked me right at the beginning that I didn't get to. Do we have any evidence that things are worse as a result of changes in the pandemic? And the answer is yes, there is some research on that now. And so it seems that people who rushed out to get a dog in the pandemic were not necessarily the same as people who ordinarily get a dog. And it was a difficult time to find a dog. So people perhaps made decisions more quickly or in a way that didn't involve waiting to find the perfect breeder for the particular type of dog that they had. So maybe some of the sources of dogs that people got were not quite as good as usual. So you should always go to a responsible breeder or rescue to get a dog. But people didn't necessarily do that because so many people were looking for dogs. And the other thing is that there were times when either, depending where people lived, it wasn't possible to socialize the puppy properly, or maybe it was possible, but people didn't really feel safe going out and about. So there was a whole generation of dogs that seemed not to have had as much socialization as usual. And there are signs now that there are dogs with more fears and anxieties. And there are a few studies that suggest that that is actually the case, unfortunately. So it does seem like right now there are more dogs with fear and anxiety. But as I said, that figure I mentioned at the beginning, almost 75%, it's such a huge number anyway, although it doesn't take account of the extent of it. And I think for any dogs that were not properly socialized as a puppy, they are probably the ones that are more likely to have severe issues, along with if they have any genetics contributing as well. So yeah, of course, it's always many things that contribute to it.
So I was thinking, I'm glad you brought up the rehoming and the euthanasia. That was something that I wanted to talk a little bit more about. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about when somebody should consider rehoming and what are some of the challenges to rehoming a fearful dog?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, anytime someone is struggling, they should reach out for help. And hopefully they would do that long before they get to the point of thinking that they might have to rehome the dog. But a very common circumstance for people to need to rehome a dog is if someone in the home is not safe from the dog, and if the dog cannot happily live with other people in the home. So maybe there are young children in the home and the dog hates young children and it's just too much of a juggling act to keep them safe. That might be one circumstance in which someone thinks of rehoming. And in that circumstance, actually, depending on the details, but you might actually be able to find a quiet home where there aren't any children and children don't visit often. And that could actually work out really well. I mean, I've known lots of cases where that has worked out really well. One thing that you have to bear in mind is that if the dog has ever bitten anyone, you need to disclose that to people, because otherwise you're going to be liable. If you're rehoming this dog with a bite history and you haven't told people, then you're putting people at risk. So they do need to know the details of what has happened in the past. And that's one of the advantages of going to a shelter or rescue, is that they will have assessed the dog. They will know quite a bit about the dog's behavior, and they'll be able to give you information about that. Whereas if you are just adopting a dog or buying a dog from someone who you've heard of online, and you don't actually know the history and you don't get any behavior help, so that's a bit more kind of risky for you. You don't know if they're just rehoming a dog who's bitten and they're not telling you. I guess I should add too that behavior problems are not the only reason that dogs get rehomed. Dogs can get rehomed for all kinds of reasons that are to do with people, such as losing the job, ending up in hospital, just simply not being able to find a new rental home that takes dogs, and so on. So I don't want to give the impression that dogs that are being rehomed necessarily have problems. They don't, and they can be absolutely wonderful dogs. And even if they have had issues in a home before, they may not have those issues in your home. And resource guarding would be another example of that as well, because resource guarding turns out to be really quite context specific. And just because a dog has been resource guarding in one home or in a shelter, there's evidence that it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to resource guard when they go to a new home too. So sometimes the context can make a big difference, and that's really important to bear in mind as well.
I would agree. If you've lived with a resource guarder, it's much easier to live with another resource guarder. So in the book on page 95, you have a list of useful skills to teach your dog. I think that, by the way, phenomenal, right? Like, it's like you were in my class Monday when I was teaching a family that have two dogs who randomly have conflict. And it happens like once every 8 months, right? And then it's dangerous. How to, like, it's like you had my list of what to teach. So would you please go into some of those things? And maybe, I mean, some of it I think people kind of already know, but kind of some of the things people don't think of that are just really good skills to teach when everything's relaxed and happy, so that you have it available when suddenly the scary thing happens that none of us could have predicted.
Yeah, and so often I think we have this idea of obedience and teaching dogs to be obedience, but I really love the move to teaching dogs life skills and things that are useful for them to know, and thinking about it from that point of view. So, I mean, one of the things, when you have a fearful dog, it could simply be to eat a treat in your presence. That could be the first thing that they need to learn. And that might, in your presence, might be with you at the very far side of the room, sat on the floor, not looking at them hiding behind the sofa and eating a treat there. And that might be the place where you're starting from. And that would be a great skill for that dog to have, because then they can develop from that. But so being able to follow a treat is really helpful, because if you put a treat in front of their nose and use it, you can move the dog into different positions. You can lure them into a sit, you can lure them into different places and so on. And then I also think teaching a nose touch is a really nice one. So to put the nose or the snout into your hand, and that's quite easy to teach. And it's a nice skill because you can use it to move them around. Say you're at the vet and you want to get the dog onto the scales, for example, you can just put your hand out and ask them to do a nose touch in such a way that they'll be on the scales. And also, if they're a bit uncomfortable in a particular situation, you can just ask them for lots of nose touches and give them treats, maybe as a distraction from what else is going on or something like that. So that can be a really useful skill for them. I think teaching a dog to come when called is really, really important, because especially with a fearful dog, you don't want them running away and getting lost. You want to make sure that they will come to you. And that is one for which you really need to bust out the really amazing treats, because coming when called is quite a difficult thing for a dog to do, especially when there are lots of interesting things going on outside. And then there can be other things that you might want to teach. So I've got leave it and stop it on the list. I've got walking nicely beside you. So in the past, people used to think the dog shouldn't be in front of you. And that makes no sense to me at all. But the dog just needs to walk beside you and not pull on the leash. And the dog walk is for the dog. So it doesn't matter where they are in relation to you, but you do want to teach them to walk nicely on a harness or a leash, because otherwise walks can be a bit difficult for you. So there are lots of different things that you can teach. I've got my suggestions are on that list. I'm really glad that they match up with some of your suggestions, Tina. I think that's great. But also, people can just think about their life and what would work for them, what they would like their dog to do. And I think when people have issues with their dog, too often they think, I want my dog to stop doing this. And they don't often think about what they would like their dog to do instead. And it's really helpful to have a more positive focus on what you would like your dog to do, and then teach your dog to do that. And it's better for you, and it's better for your relationship with your dog too. And it helps you to avoid some of those situations where people end up punishing their dog and using aversive methods, and it's not good for the dog and not good for their relationship with the dog.
I was looking at this list too, and I was thinking this is exactly what I did with owners before I retired. It's just a really nice list. It's stuff that's pretty easy to teach and can be really useful. And oftentimes I found, like, I would do it, go get the treat, then come back to touch my hand, and do touch, have me go back and forth between my hands. It was a great way to get the dog to back up with me and to be focused on me and not on what was going on. So these are great skills that are not that difficult. But that takes me to another section. I think it's on page 97, when you talk about luring, shaping, and capturing. And I was hoping you could discuss those a little bit as to what they are and how people can use them.
Yeah, so I just wanted to explain some basic dog training skills to people. So if you want to teach your dog anything, you need to learn something about dog training. And in that way, actually, I think this book is not just for people with a fearful or anxious dog. It is also for anyone who wants to learn more about how to train a dog in general. So it's got basic information that you need to know if you want to train your dog. So we talked about teaching your dog to follow a treat. We can use that as luring. So for example, you can put the treat right in front of the dog's nose and move it up very, very slowly. And then as the dog's head goes up, their bottom will come down to the floor, and you just lured them into a sit. You do need to keep it close to the dog's nose. If it's like above their head, then they're going to be jumping up for it instead. So again, it's a skill that you have to learn to do, but keep it really close to the nose, and you can teach them to do things. Shaping means thinking of the behavior that you want in the end and progressively shaping little approximations of that behavior, so you get closer and closer and closer. So suppose you want to teach them to spin, you might start just by teaching them to turn their head and rewarding that, and then to turn a little bit further, and then eventually to turn in a whole spin in a whole circle. And then you can also use capturing. And this can be a fun way to teach your dog to do something. Like if they have a cute behavior that you like, you can teach them to do that. Basically, all you do, you capture the behavior when they do it by immediately rewarding them for having done it. And over time, they will learn to do this behavior again, and you'll be able to put it on cue if you want to. So that's a really nice way. Like if you like it when your dog does a play bow, or they have some other cute little thing that they do, you can use capturing, and every time they do it, you can give them rewards, and that will encourage them to do it again. So these are just basic dog training skills that people need to learn. And again, it's useful to think of them as skills. We have to learn how to do it. And I think everyone always expects things to happen so quickly, whether you're teaching a dog a behavior or you're teaching a dog to like something and not be afraid of it. And it has to happen on the dog's time. And so that often is slower than we think. But the better your skills are, and the more closely you pay attention to the dog and the dog's pace, the better it will go. And that's especially important when it's a fearful dog and you're teaching them not to be afraid. You have to go so slowly at the beginning, keeping the dog feeling safe. And the more you do that, the faster it will be in the long run. And so many people, they go too fast and they keep accidentally putting the dog in situations where they don't feel safe, and it just slows everything down. So yeah, it's a skill that people need to learn.
As we get ready to wrap up, because I want to honor that you only have an hour to give us today. In the book, because I didn't see this, because to be fair, I haven't had a chance to read the whole thing. Do you teach things like teaching, saying to a dog you're safe and tossing a treat behind you so that you're between the dog and the scary thing? Or talk about, like, if you're at the point that you want to be able to take your dog out to, say, eat at a cafe outside, which table to choose and how to set it up that the dog's not getting crowded. Do you get into that in the book or no?
I don't get into that level of detail about specific situations, but what I try to do is give general principles that people can then apply to different situations. And there are lots of examples. So it does say that if you're working with a dog who is afraid of strangers, you don't want the dog to go up to the stranger to get the treat. You want to be the one giving the treat, because you don't want to put the dog in a situation where they're not feeling safe. And I hope that because of the way it's structured, with the beginning, like general ideas, and then through each chapter, it gives examples, like for resource guarding and so on. There are lots of examples. So I think hopefully by the end of the book, everyone will be able to think, for whatever their specific situation is, that they'll be able to use that information to work out what they need to know to help their dog feeling safe, because the emphasis really is on help the dog to feel safe.
Well, thank you, Zazie. That has been, as usual, it's been a great, I can't even believe we've been talking for an hour. It's been so wonderful. Once again, I want to recommend the book is named Bark, the Science of Helping Your Anxious, Fearful, or Reactive Dog. And I'm assuming you can find it everywhere, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, any place else you want to recommend?
It's available from all good bookstores, and authors especially love it if you support your local independent bookstore. But of course, wherever you like to buy books, you'll be able to get it from.
That's right. And I also, too, I don't know if I've had a chance to thank you in person, but Zazie did a blurb for my book, The Beekeepers, and which is on the back of my book. And I was always very grateful for that, Zazie. I was so happy that I was very fearful when I sent it off to you. I said, I just hope she likes it. So I was so glad that you did. So thank you for the blurb for my book.
You're very welcome. I absolutely loved it. I was so glad that I got to read it. I felt very lucky to be able to read it before it was published. So I really loved it. I recommend it, definitely.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
So
Tina,
Zazie,
anything else you want to add?
yeah, I want to ask what's next for Zazie Todd?
Yes.
I don't actually know yet. This book took me a long time to write, and this book, compared to my two previous books, has come out much more quickly compared to when I actually finished working on the manuscript. And so I have some ideas, but nothing is definite yet. So we have to wait and see, I'm afraid.
It's fabulous. Like, you are, as always, a rich blessing to pets and their people. And I love that your energy is very much like, we can always make it better, and slower is faster, right? Slow and steady wins the race.
Absolutely, it does. And thank you so much. It's really nice to come and chat with you again. I always love chatting with you.
I hope you'll be willing to come back.
I'd love to.
All right. Well, thank you, Zazie. And thank you all for listening to Your Family Dog. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Your Family Dog. Got questions? Interesting ideas? Visit www.yourfamilydogpodcast.com to share your thoughts.